It was one of those mornings that started like any other. The air was cool, the sun was just beginning to peek over the rooftops, and I was sipping my coffee while thinking about the day ahead. Life on Maplewood Lane had always been quiet, predictable, even. But that changed the moment I stepped outside. I walked out of the house expecting to see my car parked neatly in the driveway, just like it always was. Instead, all I saw was an empty space. My heart sank. For a second, I thought maybe Claire had taken it. She does that sometimes when she needs to run errands early. But no, her car was still sitting in the garage, untouched. Confusion quickly turned into panic. Where could it be? Did someone break in overnight? Was it stolen? I looked around, scanning the street for any signs of trouble. Nothing seemed out of place. No broken glass, no tire marks, nothing. It was as if my car had simply vanished into thin air. Then I noticed something near the front door, a crumpled piece of paper stuck under the welcome mat. At first glance, it looked like junk mail or some flyer, but when I picked it up, my stomach dropped. It wasn't junk mail at all. It was a notice from the Homeowners Association, HOA, stamped with their official seal. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Vehicle in violation of parking regulations has been towed and sold at auction per HOA bylaws. My mind raced. Sold. They sold my car. From my own driveway. This had to be some kind of mistake, or worse, a cruel joke. But deep down, I knew better. The HOA here wasn't exactly known for being reasonable. Over the past few months, I'd heard whispers from neighbors about fines for minor infractions, threats over lawn decorations, and even rumors of people being bullied into compliance. Still, selling someone's car without warning. That felt extreme, even for them. As a judge, I spend my days making sure laws are followed fairly. I hear cases, weigh evidence, and deliver verdicts based on facts, not personal opinions or petty rules. So you can imagine how infuriating it was to realize that these people had taken the law into their own hands. And not just anyone. They took my property. I stood there for a moment, gripping the paper so tightly it crumpled further in my fist. How dare they? Who gave them the authority to do this? My driveway is private property. Everyone knows that. Or at least, they're supposed to. Yet here we were. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about my car anymore. It was about principle. If they could do this to me, a judge who understands the law inside and out, what would stop them from doing the same to someone else? Someone less informed, less able to fight back. By the time I got back inside, Claire was already awake. She took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. When I told her, her eyes widened in disbelief. "They did what?" she exclaimed. "That's crazy." "It's not just crazy," I said, pacing the kitchen. Heart pounding, I continued, "This is illegal. They can't just sell someone's car because they think it's violating some made-up rule." Claire frowned, clearly worried. "What are you going to do?" I stopped pacing and looked at her. "What I always do," I replied firmly. "Make sure justice is served." And with that, I grabbed my coat and headed straight for the HOA office. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. They had messed with the wrong person. By the time I reached the HOA office, my hands were clenched into fists, and my jaw was tight. The building itself wasn't much to look at. A small, unassuming structure tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner's. It didn't scream power, but somehow, this little office had become the source of so much frustration for the neighborhood. Pushing open the glass door, I stepped inside, ready to demand answers. The reception area was empty except for a young woman sitting behind a desk, typing furiously on her computer. She glanced up as I entered, her cheerful smile faltering when she saw the storm brewing on my face. "Can I help you?" she asked hesitantly, clearly sensing that something was off. "I need to speak with Evelyn Harper," I said, my voice low but firm. "Now." Her eyes widened slightly, and she stammered, Do you have an appointment?" "No," I don't have an appointment, I replied, leaning forward just enough to make it clear I wasn't leaving without getting what I wanted. But trust me, she'll want to see me. The receptionist hesitated for a moment before picking up the phone and whispering into it. Moments later, the door to Evelyn's office opened, and there she was, impeccably dressed, as always, with that polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Judge Carter," she said, stepping out with an air of forced calm. "What brings you here today?" I didn't waste any time. Pulling out the crumpled notice, I held it up for her to see. "You towed and sold my car," I said, letting each word sink in. "From my own driveway. Care to explain how that's even remotely legal?" Evelyn's smile faltered, but only for a second. She quickly recovered, smoothing her expression, as though nothing unusual had happened. "Ah, yes," she began, gesturing for me to follow her into her office. "Let's discuss this privately, shall we?" I followed her, though not because I trusted her. I wanted to hear whatever excuses she planned to throw at me, and maybe catch her in a lie while she did it. Once we were seated, Evelyn folded her hands neatly on her desk and gave me a patronizing smile. "Your vehicle was in violation of our parking policies," she explained, as if reciting from a script. "According to Article VI, Section C of the HOA Guidelines." "Save it," I interrupted sharply. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the HOA's bylaws, which I'd already looked up earlier. "Let's review these so-called policies together, shall we? Because nowhere does it say you can sell someone's car outright." Evelyn's composure cracked ever so slightly. Her perfectly manicured fingers twitched on the desk, betraying her discomfort. "Well, the language may not explicitly state sale, but it does give us authority to remove vehicles that are deemed disruptive or non-compliant." "Disruptive?" I repeated, incredulous. My car was parked in my driveway. "How is that disruptive?" She shifted in her seat, clearly struggling to come up with a plausible answer. "It's about maintaining uniformity within the community," she finally said, her tone taking on a defensive edge. "If we allow exceptions, it sets a dangerous precedent." "Uniformity?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You think towing and selling people's cars promotes harmony. This isn't about keeping the neighborhood tidy. It's about control. And guess what? You crossed a line." For the first time since I'd met her, Evelyn actually looked rattled. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly unsure of what to say next. Finally, she muttered, "We may have overstepped." "You think?" I snapped, slamming my hand on the desk for emphasis. "Where's my car now, Evelyn? What did you do with it?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. When she finally spoke, her words were barely audible. "It went to auction yesterday." "Auction?" I echoed, my anger boiling over. "You sold my property without giving me a chance to address the issue, without even notifying me properly." "It's standard procedure," she mumbled weakly, avoiding eye contact. "Standard procedure," I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "No, Evelyn. This isn't procedure. It's theft. And mark my words, you're going to regret this." As I stood up to leave, I could feel her eyes on me, watching nervously as I stormed out of the office. My blood was still boiling, but one thing was crystal clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That evening, I couldn't shake the anger coursing through me. The more I thought about what Evelyn had done, the angrier I became. Selling my car wasn't just a violation of basic decency, it was a blatant disregard for the law. And as someone who spent his days ensuring justice, I couldn't let this slide. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about sending a message that no one, not even the HOA, was above the rules. Claire found me pacing in the living room, muttering under my breath. She'd been trying to calm me down all day, but it was clear she was starting to worry. "What are you thinking?" she asked cautiously, sitting on the edge of the couch. "I'm thinking we take them down," I replied firmly. This isn't just about my car. It's about accountability. If they can do this to me, a judge, what stops them from doing worse to someone else? Claire sighed, rubbing her temples. I get it, but be careful. These people don't play fair. Her words stuck with me, but they only fueled my determination. First thing the next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the local police department. I explained everything. The notice, Evelyn's weak excuses, and the fact that my car had been sold without proper legal justification. To my relief, the officer handling the case seemed genuinely concerned. This sounds serious, he said after taking notes. Let us look into it. We'll also need copies of the HOA's records. If there's anything illegal going on, we'll find it. Encouraged by his response, I decided to dig deeper myself. I started reaching out to neighbors, asking if anyone else had experienced similar issues with the HOA. At first, people were hesitant to talk, afraid of retaliation. But once word spread that I was challenging the HOA, stories began pouring in. One family told me they'd received fines for having a mailbox that was too colorful. Another neighbor said their dog had mysteriously disappeared after refusing to comply with strict leash laws. A retired teacher confided that her garden had been vandalized following a dispute over plant height restrictions. Each story painted a clearer picture. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were bullying people into submission. Then came the breakthrough. Late one night, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. It was from a former HOA employee who claimed to have insider information. Attached were documents detailing shady dealings between Evelyn and Marcus Reed, the developer tied to the HOA. According to the emails, they'd been auctioning off impounded vehicles and funneling the money into offshore accounts linked to Marcus's company. The funds weren't being used for community improvements, like they claimed. They were lining their own pockets. Reading through the evidence, I felt a mix of outrage and vindication. This was bigger than I'd imagined. Evelyn and Marcus weren't just overzealous rule enforcers. They were running a scam right under everyone's noses. And now, thanks to this whistleblower, I had proof. The next day, I called Claire into the study and showed her the documents. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the files. "This is insane," she whispered. "What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to bring them down," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Publicly. If they think they can hide behind vague rules and intimidation, they're wrong. Justice doesn't work that way." Claire nodded slowly, though I could see the concern lingering in her eyes. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said softly. "These people won't go down without a fight." I promised her I would, but deep down, I knew she was right. This wasn't going to be easy. Evelyn and Marcus had power, connections, and resources, but none of that mattered to me. What mattered was doing the right thing. For my family, for my neighbors, and for the principle of fairness itself. And so, with the evidence in hand, I began planning my next move. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The HOA's days of unchecked authority were numbered. The next step was clear. I needed to confront the HOA publicly. Keeping this quiet wouldn't do anyone any good. It was time to expose their actions for what they truly were. I called an emergency meeting of the HOA board, spreading the word through flyers and texts to make sure every resident knew about it. The turnout was overwhelming. Neighbors packed into the community center, filling every seat and spilling into the aisles. Whispers buzzed around the room as people exchanged stories, their faces a mix of anger, fear, and curiosity. Evelyn Harper walked in with her usual air of confidence, flanked by Marcus Reed and two other board members. They took their places at the front of the room, but there was something different about Evelyn tonight. Her smile seemed forced, her posture stiff. She glanced around the crowded room, clearly unsettled by the sea of hostile stares. Before she could say a word, I stood up from my chair near the back and moved toward the podium. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, but loud enough to carry across the room. We've tolerated far too much nonsense from this organization. Tonight, we're putting an end to it. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. Instead, she crossed her arms and glared at me, waiting for me to continue. For months, maybe even years, we've been told that these rules are for our own good. That towing cars, issuing ridiculous fines, and policing every detail of our lives is somehow making Maplewood Lane a better place. I paused, scanning the crowd. But let me ask you this. Does it feel like a better place, or does it feel like we're living under a dictatorship? A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Encouraged, I pressed on. Thanks to documents provided by a whistleblower and verified by law enforcement, I can prove that the HOA has been operating outside the bounds of legality. They've seized property, extorted money, and funneled funds into private accounts, all while hiding behind vague excuses about maintaining standards. Gasps erupted throughout the room. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Evelyn's face turned pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't just incompetence, I continued, holding up a folder filled with copies of the incriminating emails and financial records. This is corruption. And it stops now. Evelyn finally found her voice. These allegations are baseless, she snapped, standing abruptly. You're using your position as a judge to bully us, Judge Carter. This is harassment. The room erupted in murmurs again, but I remained calm. Harassment, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Is that what you call exposing the truth? If so, then yes, I'm guilty. But here's the thing, Evelyn. The truth has a way of coming out, whether you like it or not. I turned back to the crowd, addressing them directly. We have two options here. Either the current board resigns voluntarily and faces consequences for their actions, or we take this evidence to the authorities and let them handle it. Your choice. The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, Evelyn sank back into her chair, defeated. Marcus leaned over to whisper something to her, but she shook her head, her expression grim. One of the other board members raised a shaky hand. Maybe stepping down is the best option, he muttered, looking anywhere but at Evelyn. It was over. The board had crumbled under the weight of their own wrongdoing. As neighbors clapped and cheered, I felt a small sense of victory, but also a pang of sadness. How had things gotten this bad? And how many others had suffered because of their greed? Still, as I stepped away from the podium, I reminded myself why I'd done this. Justice wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. The fallout from the meeting was swift and chaotic, like a storm finally breaking after days of oppressive heat. Evelyn Harper and Marcus Reed didn't even try to put up a fight once the evidence was laid bare for everyone to see. They resigned immediately, along with two other board members implicated in the scandal. The room erupted into a mix of cheers, gasps, and murmurs as people processed what had just happened. It felt surreal, like watching a house of cards collapse under its own weight. But not everyone was happy about it. As the crowd began to disperse, I noticed a few neighbors whispering among themselves, casting uneasy glances in my direction. Some nodded approvingly, but others looked resentful. One man, Mr. Lewis, approached me as I was gathering my papers. His arms were crossed, and his expression was unreadable. "You really think this was necessary?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Dragging all this out in public, making enemies of people who live right here on our street." I sighed, bracing myself for the conversation. "Mr. Lewis, I didn't do this to cause trouble. I did it because they broke the law. Would you rather I stayed quiet while they kept taking advantage of us?" He hesitated, glancing at the floor before speaking again. "Maybe there's such a thing as too much justice, Judge Carter. You've made some powerful enemies tonight." His words lingered in my mind long after he walked away. That night, as Claire and I sat at the kitchen table going over the events of the day, she echoed similar concerns. Do you think we should have handled it differently? She asked gently. Some of the neighbors seem upset. They're upset because they're scared, I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. Scared that standing up to people like Evelyn and Marcus might bring consequences. But if we let fear dictate our actions, nothing ever changes. Claire reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. I'm proud of you for doing the right thing. Just be careful, okay? Not everyone sees things the way we do. Her words stayed with me as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. She was right. This wasn't over. Evelyn's resignation didn't mean she'd given up. Neither had Marcus. People like them don't walk away quietly. And then there were the whispers from neighbors who thought I'd gone too far. Had I alienated the very people I was trying to protect? The next morning brought more complications. A local news crew showed up at the end of Maplewood Lane, tipped off by someone about the drama unfolding in our little neighborhood. Reporters knocked on doors, asking questions about the HOA scandal and quoting anonymous sources claiming I'd bullied the board into submission. The headlines painted me as some kind of vigilant judge, a man using his authority to settle personal scores. At first, I ignored it. Let them write what they wanted. The truth would speak for itself. But the tension in the neighborhood grew thicker with each passing day. Neighbors who used to wave hello now avoided eye contact. Even Mr. Thompson, who had initially thanked me for exposing the HOA's corruption, seemed distant when I passed him on the sidewalk. Then came the anonymous letter. It arrived late one evening, slipped under our front door. The note was short and typed in plain text. Asterisk, you've made your point, Judge Carter. Leave it alone, or else. Asterisk. My stomach churned as I read it. Was this Evelyn's doing? Or someone else angry about the upheaval? I didn't know, but the message was clear. This battle had awakened something darker than I'd anticipated. Despite the unease creeping into my chest, I refused to back down. This wasn't about revenge or power. It was about fairness. If letting people know they weren't untouchable meant ruffling feathers, so be it. Still, as I locked the door that night and double-checked the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. The anonymous letter was just the beginning. Over the next few days, strange things started happening around the house. One morning, I found a rock lying in the middle of our driveway with a note tied to it. Asterisk, back off. Asterisk, another night. Someone slashed one of our garden hoses and left it leaking all over the yard. It wasn't vandalism on a grand scale, but it was enough to send a message and make it clear that whoever was behind this wasn't playing games. Claire grew increasingly anxious. She begged me to let the authorities handle the rest of the investigation, but I couldn't bring myself to step back. The HOA scandal had become more than just my fight. It was about protecting the neighborhood from future abuses. If I backed down now, what would stop them, or anyone else, from trying to regain control? Things escalated when Marcus Reed attempted to flee the country. News broke that he'd been stopped at the airport, thanks to the evidence I'd uncovered tying him to the offshore accounts. Evelyn, on the other hand, remained defiant. During her arraignment, she glared at me from across the courtroom, her eyes blazing with hatred. You think you're untouchable because you wear a robe. She spat during a heated exchange outside the courthouse. This isn't over, Judge Carter. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to show fear. No, Evelyn, I replied calmly. This is very much over. For you. Despite her bravado, the law caught up with her quickly. Facing multiple charges, including theft and fraud, she eventually accepted a plea deal, probation, and a hefty fine. Marcus, however, wasn't so lucky. He pled guilty to embezzlement and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Justice had been served, at least on paper. But the victory felt hollow. While some neighbors celebrated the downfall of the corrupt HOA board, others continued to distance themselves from me. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself their reactions were temporary. Surely, they'd come around once they realized how much better life could be without Evelyn and Marcus pulling the strings. But as weeks turned into months, the divide only deepened. One afternoon, I ran into Mr. Lewis while walking the dog. He nodded curtly but avoided making eye contact. When I stopped to ask if everything was okay, his response was clipped. "Look, Judge Carter," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "We appreciate what you did, but not everyone wants to live under a microscope. People are tired of drama." His words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they highlighted something I hadn't fully considered. Change often comes at a cost. By exposing the HOA's corruption, I disrupted the fragile peace people had grown accustomed to, even if that peace came at the expense of fairness. For some, stability mattered more than justice. Still, not all reactions were negative. New faces began emerging within the community, neighbors who had previously kept to themselves, but now felt empowered to speak up. Together, we formed a grassroots committee to manage neighborhood affairs. Gone were the draconian rules and unaccountable leaders. In their place stood a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. Even Claire seemed cautiously optimistic. "Maybe this will work out after all," she admitted one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "But promise me something. You'll take a break from being everyone's hero for a while, okay? You've earned it." I smiled, though part of me knew the fight wasn't truly over. Evelyn's warning still echoed in my mind, a reminder that power struggles rarely end cleanly. But for now, Maplewood Lane felt like home again, a fragile piece, hard-won, but worth fighting for. As the streetlights flickered on, and the neighborhood settled into its quiet rhythm, I allowed myself a moment of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together, not as adversaries, but as neighbors. Months passed, and life on Maplewood Lane began to settle into a new rhythm. The grassroots committee we'd formed worked tirelessly to rebuild trust within the neighborhood. Gone were the rigid rules about mailbox colors or lawn height. Instead, we focused on practical matters like fixing potholes, organizing community cleanup days, and hosting block parties where neighbors could reconnect. Slowly but surely, the tension that had gripped us for so long began to ease. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lingering beneath the surface, like the calm before another storm. Evelyn's warning echoed in my mind whenever I walked past her empty house, now up for sale. Her words had been more than just anger. They carried a veiled threat, one I suspected she wasn't alone in making. Who else might hold a grudge? And how far would they go to retaliate? One evening, as Claire and I sat on the porch sipping tea, a car slowed down at the end of our driveway. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass by, but this one lingered longer than necessary. The driver rolled down the window and stared directly at us before speeding off. My heart skipped a beat, and Claire set her cup down with a shaky hand. "Do you think?" she started, trailing off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew exactly what she meant. "I don't know," I admitted, though I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "But if someone's trying to intimidate us, it won't work." Despite my outward confidence, I couldn't deny the unease creeping back into our lives. That night, I checked every lock twice, pulled the curtains shut, and kept my phone close by, just in case. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the sound of branches scraping against the windows and distant car engines revving in the night. The next morning, I decided to take action. I called the police and reported the suspicious activity, providing details about the car and its license plate number. They promised to look into it, but I knew better than anyone that investigations took time, and justice often moves slower than fear. In the meantime, I tried to focus on the positives. The neighborhood was healing, even if scars remained. Neighbors who had once avoided me began reaching out, inviting us to barbecues and holiday gatherings. Mr. Thompson stopped by one afternoon with a six-pack of beer and an apology for doubting me during the early days of the scandal. "You did what needed to be done," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. "And I'm grateful." Even Mr. Lewis softened over time. One Saturday morning, He approached me while I was trimming the hedges. "I owe you an apology," he said, shuffling his feet awkwardly. "What you did, it wasn't easy, and maybe I didn't understand it at first, but things are better now. Thank you." His words meant more to me than he realized. For all the challenges we'd faced, moments like these reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. Justice isn't always about grand gestures. It's about creating a world where people can live without fear of being taken advantage of. As spring turned to summer, the neighborhood bloomed with new energy. Children played outside again, laughter filling the air. Garden gnomes reappeared in yards, along with colorful wind chimes and quirky lawn ornaments. It was proof that freedom, real freedom, looked different for everyone, and there was beauty in that diversity. But late at night, when the streets were quiet and the moon cast long shadows across the pavement, I still thought about Evelyn's parting words. Had she given up, or was she waiting for the right moment to strike back? Only time would tell. For now, though, Maplewood Lane felt like home. A fragile piece, hard won, but worth protecting. And I vowed to keep fighting for it, no matter what came next.